Hello everyone, welcome to the wood shop. Before we do any work, we need to make sure that we are safe. Always wear safety glasses, hearing protection if necessary, remove jewelry, tie back long hair, tuck in loose clothing, and always wear closed-toed shoes. Okay, so here we are at the table saw. First, I'm just going to talk about a few of the safety mechanisms that we have in place on the table saw to keep you safe and make your cut turn out better. So this would end up being installed behind the blade here. Right now there's a writhing knife which acts as a splitter. So as the piece of wood goes through the table saw blade, sometimes it wants to pinch on the back side of the blade, and that can cause a kickback because the blade is trying to push the piece of wood back at us, and if the piece of wood is grabbing onto the blade because it has internal tension in the wood fibers, it's going to want to come flying back at us. That's called a kickback. So what this writhing knife does is prevent the piece of wood from grabbing onto the back side of the blade as it wants to pinch inward. Sometimes it goes outwards. Instead of pinching, the groove on the back side of your cut would actually widen out. But in that case, it's probably going to start to bind a little bit in the middle because it's going to be pushing on the fence at these 2 points here and trying to push away in the middle. And so you can still have a kickback if that's the case as well. So you should be using push sticks always. There are multiple different types of push sticks. These are kind of all the same. Thicker ones, thinner ones. We also have these anti-kickback fingers. So as your piece of wood goes through, when this is installed, these little teeth on here prevent it from coming back. So it sort of jams it up in there, and I'll show you that now. So I'm gonna install that on the table saw, but first I'm gonna isolate the power, remove our table insert, remove our smaller writhing knife. Sometimes we can't use this larger assembly because we may need to rip smaller pieces of material, and this can get in the way. So this table insert should be flush all the way around, and then we're going to lower the blade until we're about a 1/4 inch above our stock. So the top of the blade is about a 1/4 of an inch above our finished stock that we're going to rip. Okay? And at this point we should have a reference face and a reference edge. Our reference face goes down and our reference edge goes against our rip fence. And we're just going to take a skim off this piece of wood just for demonstration's sake. This is called a featherboard, and it helps to keep this piece of wood pressed up against the rip fence. And also it helps to prevent kickback because all the fingers, they only want to move in one direction as a piece of wood is going past it. They want to move out of the way, but then if you try and pull it back, they sort of jam up and prevent it from kicking back. Okay, so I've got my guard, secondary guard on here. I have push sticks, I have a feather board, and I think I'm ready to go. So I'm going to turn the switch back on, and when the light's solid green, I pull the paddle straight toward me. So now we're ready to make this cut. So you'll notice I stood a little bit to the right so that if I happen to have a kickback, it's going to miss me. It's going to fly back this way. And also making sure there's nobody behind you who could be injured in the event of a kickback is a good idea. Never reaching over the blade to retrieve your piece of wood. If you need to, you can have somebody catch on the outbound side, but they're just retrieving the piece of wood. They're not pulling, they're not reaching in to grab it or anything like that. You as the operator are supposed to be in full control of your piece of wood, so make sure you push it all the way past the blade to the other side. So the other operation, that was ripping. The other operation that the table saw is capable of doing is cross-cutting. But before we go there, one thing you should never do is freehand cut on the table saw. If you have a crooked line to cut that's maybe diagonal through your piece of wood from like one corner to the next, there are safer ways to do it. Freehand cutting is a bad idea. Never ever freehand cut, because you risk losing control of the cut. You can't really cut a straight line. You're likely to have it bind. And usually if you're going to try and freehand cut, you sort of need to stand directly behind the blade, which is a bad place to be for, I hope, pretty obvious reasons. So no freehand cutting on the table saw. Also, if we were going to cut short pieces, this is pretty unsafe as well, because there's not a lot of fence contact on our piece of wood. So pieces less than 12 inches long or 12 inches of fence contact should not be cut on the table saw. Technically it can be done, but you should have a lot of experience on a table saw before you plan on making any of these cuts, okay? So if you have a short piece that needs to be cut, make sure your instructor makes that cut for you, i.e. me or somebody else who is properly trained and knows what to do, what to look out for, and how to react in the event of something going wrong. So there are two jigs that we can use for cross-cutting. One is called the miter gauge. Now this slides into the T-slot, the little washer, so it's not going to lift out on the front edge. This we can change the angle to cut miters if we wanted to. We can run it on this side, or we can run it on this side in this T-slot to make cuts. So if I were going to cross-cut a piece of wood, say I wanted to cross-cut this, it has a nice edge on it, and I just want to make this 90 degrees. Oops, I'm not in my slot anymore. There we go. I'm going to set my blade height to about 1/4 inch. That looks good there. Turn our blade on, or our saw on. Gotta wait for my trusty green light. Technically, I should have done that cut with our larger assembly with the fence, but sometimes it gets in the way of the height here. And so I chose to remove it because also I need to get it out of the way for our crosscut sled. Our crosscut sled has two runners that fit in our T-slots here and here. And so it should run nice and smooth. If it doesn't, you can use some silicone spray on the underside to make it glide a little bit nicer. And this is designed to cut 90 degrees to this edge here, the back fence of our crosscut sled. For pretty obvious reasons, but I have to say it anyway, no hands here, because this is where the blade would come out if you happen to go too far. So we want to push here and push here, and we would simply push here and controlling the piece of wood with your other hand. And I like to butt my elbow into my hip so I can push with my legs, so it's not all my shoulders and arms and back doing all that work. So I'll show you what this crosscut looks like. Oh. I forgot to set my blade height, because I just added about 1/2 inch of extra thickness there, and so I know my blade is going to be too low. Here we go again. there is an acrylic, or there's a polycarbonate plastic shield here to help protect you from any dust that comes up and any minor kickbacks that can happen from here. Because we've cut some angled cuts with the saw blade tipped over, sometimes we get pieces of wood that sort of like to travel down this slide and go into the blade, and then they go bang. Usually that doesn't affect your cut, but it's something to be aware of. If you need to cut pieces of wood all to the same width, to cross cut all to the same width, you could set up a stop block with a clamp to hold this in place, and then you can make a cut, pull that piece out of the way, slide this in, make another cut, so on and so forth. And then you would have two pieces exactly the same, just like we saw on the sliding compound miter saw safety test. But what you shouldn't do, you shouldn't have, if you were going to cross cut a long piece and you wanted it to be this long, you should not use the rip fence and the cross cut sled at the same time, because it's pinched between here and 2 points and has nowhere to go, and you're going to get a kickback. Something's going to give. So never double fence. This is called double fencing. So move your rip fence out of the way and cross cut only in free open space and against the back fence of the cross cut sled. All right. So that's it for table saw safety. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.